Morning, everyone. We'll get the governing board meeting underway here today for Wednesday, November 15th, 2023. It is now 9:15 a.m. The first item on the agenda is the roll call to determine a quorum. Maria.
Ms. Alding,
Here.
Mr. Aguilar,
Here.
Ms. Conrad Seda,
Here.
Ms. Dis,
Here.
Ms. Faustinos,
Here.
Mr. Friedrich,
Here.
Ms. Gustafson,
Here.
Ms. Hayes, Ms. Hill, Mr. Honigman,
Here.
Ms. Lane,
Here.
Ms. Loomer,
Here.
Mr. Rice, Mr. Settlemeyer, Ms. Williamson.
Here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Great, thank you very much. Appreciate that. So now I'm going to go over the remote and in-person meeting rules for the day. For the members of the public who are joining us remotely, to observe the meeting, go to trpa.gov. Under the calendar header, click on Governing Board Hybrid Meeting for November 15th, 2023. There you will find a link to the public webinar hosted on Zoom. I did want to mention that there are new Zoom programs and updates. So you will do better if you've updated your Zoom account to the current program. So look for that. If you get that notice, go ahead and upgrade. It will help on your viewing of the meeting and participation. To address board members directly with your comments, then you'll raise your hand in Zoom by clicking raise hand at the bottom of your screen at the appropriate agenda item. And with your hand raised, you will be unmuted by TRPA staff and have 3 minutes to address the board. If you have used the dial-in numbers to join us by telephone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand and be unmuted. For items that are agendized as information only, we will hear public comment during the general public comment period at the very end of the meeting. Comments on items agendized for action or possible action, we will hear public comment before the board takes any action. To remote board members, if you wish to speak, please also raise your hand in Zoom. You will find the hand icon on the bottom of your screen. Remote board members may not use the chat box to make any comments or to have sidebar conversations. Please remember, everyone, mute your mic unless speaking to cut down on background noise. And finally, I would like to ask that all remote members turn on their cameras if they are able. Members of the public who have joined us in person, please use the sign-in sheets at the back of the room to indicate which item you're intending to comment on. And at the appropriate time for public comment on an agenda item, please line up at the podium to speak. Board members who are in person, please raise your hand if you wish to comment and speak clearly into the microphone in front of you. If you are viewing on the webinar on a personal computer, please ensure that your microphone and speakers are turned off to prevent audio feedback into the room. So now we will go to the pledge, item 2 on our agenda, Pledge of Allegiance. And John, will you lead us today in the pledge?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to item 3 on our agenda, approval of the agenda. Are there any staff changes to the agenda?
Madam Chair, Julie Reagan, TRPA Executive Director. There are no changes. I did want to point out for your clarification and information an errata on the committee assignments, which is at the dais. It is also online for the public, and we had a few switches that I wanted to point out. So if there's any questions, please don't hesitate to ask, but that is still on consent. And then just further clarification, the regional plan implementation committee's title is slightly different going forward just to regional planning. We're streamlining and shortening, and the membership will change for the afternoon meeting at the conclusion of the general board meeting. That committee will resume operations. So thank you.
So no changes to the agenda with the acceptance of that errata on the consent calendar. Are there any objections from the board? Then we'll deem the agenda approved as posted. And we'll move on to approval of the minutes. We are on agenda item 4, approval of the minutes. We have a draft set of minutes from October 25th, 2023. This is on page 21 of our packets. Does any member of the committee wish to make a change?
Yes, just a few minor clerical changes to the minutes, but with that, I'll recommend that we approve the minutes from the governing board meeting of October 25th, 2023 as amended.
Is there any objections? Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. We'll move on then to item 5. This is the TRPA consent calendar. There are 2 items on consent, which were reviewed by one was reviewed by the Operations and Governance Committee, and one which wasn't reviewed by any committee and contains that errata that Julie mentioned. As a reminder to the public, after board discussion on this item, you may raise your hand in person to be called on or in Zoom to be unmuted by TRPA staff to share your comments. Shelley, will you report on the Operations and Governance Committee meeting?
Yes, thank you. Well, we're one third of the way into our fiscal year 2024, and everything is going according to plan. We are still waiting for confirmation of the additional funding from the state of California for salary adjustments, but according to Chris, he's optimistic that that money will be forthcoming. And I'll note that planning fees are ahead of the 3-year average, so everything is in order.
Thank you. And the second item on the consent calendar is the revised committee charters with the errata that Julie mentioned. This is found on page 111 of your packets. Do any board members have any comments or questions on this consent calendar item? Not seeing any here. Anyone online? I'm not seeing hands go up, but Catherine, maybe do you see any hands from our board members? Because there are quite a few online, so I have to I have to go up and down the screen here.
There are no board member hands raised.
Okay, then we'll go to the public on this item. Are there any members of the public who wish to address the governing board on the consent calendar items? Please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking raise hand at the bottom of your Zoom screen or by dialing *9, and you'll be unmuted to speak to the board on this item.
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised online to comment.
And I see that our members of the public aren't jumping up to the podium back there. I think they're here for another item. So then we'll go on. We don't have any public comment on this item, so I'd entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
Thank you, Shelley. Any further discussion? Okay, then we'll do a roll call vote on this. Maria?
Ms. Conrad Seda,
Yes.
Ms. Aldine,
Yes.
Ms. Faustinos,
Yes.
Mr. Aguilar,
Yes.
Mr. Friedrich,
Yes.
Ms. Dis,
Yes.
Mr. Honigman,
Yes.
Ms. Hill, Ms. Lane,
Yes.
Mr. Rice, Ms. Loomer,
Yes.
Mr. Settlemeyer, Ms. Williamson,
Yes.
Ms. Gustafson.
Yes.
Madam Chair, that motion passes.
Thank you, Maria. So we'll move on then to item 6A of our agenda. We're on our planning matters, and this is 6A is Aquatic Invasive Species Annual Program Report. Information on this item can be found on page 119 of our board packets. As a reminder to the public, since no action is being taken on this item, any member of the public is welcome to comment during our final public comment period. Then I'll turn it over to Dennis to give us a report on this item.
That one, wrong button. Good morning, everybody. Dennis Baglow, Aquatic Invasive Species Program Manager for TRPA. We're going to go through a program update. We'll kind of give a high level overview of what the program consists of, talk about some of our priorities within prevention, control, and monitoring. We'll give you an update on the New Zealand mud snail response and just some outlook on program funding. So, okay, so what are aquatic invasive species? This is the definition within our code, but they're non-native species introduced generally by human activities and can have devastating impacts on the environment, especially here in Lake Tahoe. We have a fragile ecosystem. But things we're concerned about, the two on the left are quagga mussels attached to a boat prop, and the harvester that you see with all those weeds, that's a water hyacinth, which is in the Sacramento Bay Delta area. And then on the right are Asian clams on the far right with some of that filamentous algae that we've seen pop up with larger populations of Asian clams, and then certainly Eurasian water milfoil. And just as a reminder, we do not have quagga mussels or those water hyacinth. So our program is kind of a broad program with a lot of different elements. We do have a federally approved aquatic invasive species management plan, which has been very critical in the rapid response to the New Zealand mud snail, but it is approved by the Federal Advisory Committee known as Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force that we serve on that body. And within that, it has our different strategies within prevention, mainly to reduce risk. We do boat inspections, mandatory boat inspections to reduce risk of new invasions. And then with control of existing species that were introduced into the lake prior to our inspection program, such as that Eurasian water milfoil and curlyleaf pondweed, trying to reduce abundance lake-wide. And then monitoring, surveillance, and rapid response are our different types of monitoring activities, monitoring at a lake-wide scale, surveillance at more fine scale, and then rapid response to anything that we see, certainly with something like New Zealand mud snails. And that is meant to track our progress, the monitoring over time to make sure we're following our protocols, not only with prevention, but control to make sure to see if we're reducing species as we intend to. And then also that ability to react quickly to something newly discovered. Lots of coordination in our partnerships. This program wouldn't exist without that critical level of partnerships, dozens and dozens, I think it's 80 something now within the entire EIP, but our critical implementation partners such as the Tahoe Resource Conservation District that does the boat inspections for us and is also a critical partner in control and has really been instrumental with this New Zealand mud snail response as well. And then we try to make all of our policy decisions based on science, not only with prevention, with knowing what temperature of water is necessary to kill any of the invasive species we're concerned about, but also with control as well. If you remember with the Tahoe Keys project, that a comprehensive environmental analysis that looked at the different aspects of control treatment methods that we were proposing to make sure that we had a rigorous scientific assessment of those treatments. And then success and leadership. We are still the standard, the gold standard for both control and prevention. But then we also have our folks serving in leadership positions. Tom Booz is going to be the president of a new, not new, it's new to us, I guess I should say, serving in that capacity. It's a national invasive species, both terrestrial and aquatic. It's called NASMA. I don't remember what it stands for. Sorry. It's long. And I just recently completed my term as chair of the Western Regional Panel. And then Emily has been providing not treatments, but trainings on critical risk of spread of invasives doing any type of activity in the lake, whether it's some sort of construction project or other monitoring activities. It's called HACCP, Hazard Assessment and Critical Control Point. So it's a broad thing, but now it's being applied at the invasive level as well. So looking at our priorities for prevention, as always, we're trying to reduce the threat of new invasions with our mandatory boat inspections, decontamination using hot water. Our inspectors are super effective at what they do, highly trained and very committed. And then also with this new invasion of New Zealand mud snails, there's now a bigger focus on our Tahoe keepers. We want to try to emphasize the importance of that and enhance it to address not only that species, but any other potential species that we may get or be at risk for. So looking at our Tahoe keepers program, we have bipartisan infrastructure funding to update that with Spanish language. You see an example there on the right of a rack card that was produced for Spanish language native speakers. And then permanent inspection stations. So we're making really good progress there. We have additional funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law for that as well. Went from 0 to 60 on that. And thank to Member Lane for making the Myers process take that next step. We are meeting with El Dorado County and the California Tahoe Conservancy at the end of the month to talk about some next steps. But thanks to Brooke, we have the county to help us with serving as a CEQA lead and project management. And the example of a conceptual site plan is on the bottom in the middle there, similar or very close to where we are now, but trying to incorporate employee housing as well, which is really exciting. And then on the top right or on the top middle is the Spooner permanent inspection stations. We just signed a contract with the Tahoe Transportation District. We both have needs at the location for structural needs, both for transit and for the invasive species inspection station aspect. The NDOT is serving as the engineering level for design. So they're taking care of all that part. They have an RFP and a contractor already selected, and TTD will be releasing an RFP for the structural design, presumably by the end of the year. We're making really good progress there. And with control, we're guided by our action agenda. This is a strategic document that we commissioned in 2019 that really focuses on reducing abundance of existing species and kind of gives us a roadmap as to the funding and other kind of needs we have to achieve significant reductions in control. And one of the major aspects of it is to talk about the funding necessary. And I'll talk more about that at the end of the presentation, but we're about half funded of what we think we need to accomplish reductions over the 10-year planning horizon of that strategic document. And it also talks about how to increase pace and scale, and that's part of that funding equation. And then some of the projects we've been working on this season, both managed by or overseen by TRPA, but also Tahoe RCDs, the Taylor to Lac project. This is the project we're partnering with the Forest Service where we are serving as a project manager. This is a example of some of the weeds that were discovered offshore of Tahoe, of the Taylor to Lac creeks. So we have infrastructure money to address this as it likely came from those creeks that are infested. So we've got some work going on, just completed last week. I think they got about 5 or 6 days in. We'll probably do another 5 or 6 days next week. At least a 6-acre infestation, not total dense, but over space. So there's a lot of different sparse or patchy types of densities. But that's an example of what they see underwater at that location. This is the Taylor Creek marsh system itself. So an aerial view. And so this is just an example or showing the barriers now covered in a lot of water this year. And so they spent a lot of time this year investigating the site. There's a lot of high flows, a lot of repairs were needed. So they were able to get out there very quickly and restore those barriers that were placed last season in 2022. But this is one of the critical locations. It's one of the most important ecological sites in Tahoe. It can be home for any native species that we have. And it's one of the largest functioning wetlands in the entire basin, which are super critical for resiliency in light of climate change. And then looking at Emerald Bay, this was a reinfestation that was discovered as a result of the surveillance monitoring I mentioned earlier on. It's one of the types of monitoring that we do where we go back to previously treated locations to make sure nothing has popped up. While we still have a major infestation in the Keys, we're always going to need to do that surveillance level of monitoring to ensure we're being able to address projects like this before they get out of hand. The original infestation was about 6+ acres 10 years ago. And then their surveillance divers discovered about 3 acres just last season. And with funding from the Tahoe Fund, we were able to get out there this season and they just finished the work at about 3 acres. And then you remember the Tahoe Keys. This is year 2 was just completed. So an example of sonar scans that are used to detect biovolume of plants. On the left is from 2022 in the summer. And then on the right is, I believe, late August 2023. So the green is good. And if you can see, it's a little small, but we can get copies of this if you like. But the colored polygons, the outlined, are the different treatment sites. So on the left is where we had herbicides and combination of herbicide and UV light. And some of the ones on the right in the middle are where UV light only was used. So a lot of areas achieved that 75% reduction in biovolume, which was the target. And then from there, we use that monitoring information from the beginning of this season to determine where those Group B methods would go. If you remember, Group A was the initial treatments such as UV light and herbicides to get that knockback of 75%, and then using Group B, which is any non-chemical method, including UV light, to maintain that knockback. So this is an example of where those Group B sites occurred. So much smaller scale. So when these treatment sites were about 1 acre to 2 acres in size, these Group B locations for bottom barriers and hand pulling were much smaller scale, maybe 1/10 or 2/10 of an acre. But because of the high water conditions this year, we have areas along the shore that were re-wetted that weren't actually treated last year. And then with one of the herbicides lasting for longer than we anticipated, which required that turbidity curtain to remain in place, the UV light boat wasn't able to go in as soon as we wanted to in those combo sites. So we actually had the UV boat go in there this year and perform Group A treatments in those combo sites. So quite a bit of UV light use this year, not only as Group B, but to repeat some of the Group A treatments. And because we have that availability now, he actually went into the UV only sites and treated those holistically as well to make sure we're keeping that knockback down. So taking advantage of every opportunity we have to maintain knockback of biovolume. So these are the different Group B or different treatment sites that occurred this year. If you, as I mentioned with UV, it was also used as the Group A type of treatment this year, both in the UV only sites and in the combo sites at about 25 acres in total. That does include multiple rounds of treatments. He goes in 2 to 4 times a year at those locations, spending anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes at each treatment plot. And then with bottom barriers at Group B, about 3/4 of an acre overall at 9 different sites. As I mentioned, so much smaller scale of these treatments. And then diver assisted suction at 12 sites, just over an acre. And then UV as spot treatments with those Group B treatments at 10 different sites at about 6 acres. He has a little bit more capacity, so he was able to treat more. But then also does account for the repeated visits to those sites. And so now before I move into additional discussions on monitoring, but the interim report for year 2 was just completed by the Tahoe Keys Property Owners Association. It is available online. I think there's a link in the staff report as well. And now we're having conversations about planning for year 3 and beyond. What do we need to plan for as we're going through year 3 implementation to think about the whole system? All the analysis that will need to occur, additional monitoring, and what types of treatments might be appropriate, and then setting up to make sure we have a roadmap in place to get us to that point. So looking at our monitoring program, as I mentioned, it tracks our success both in prevention and control. With prevention, we have a secret shopper that goes out to all of the inspection locations and to our launch facilities to make sure that protocols are being followed. That is done by an independent organization that does these on our behalf. And we've had very good success throughout the history of the program. They also check on customer service aspects and education aspects to make sure that not only our inspectors, but the contracted partners at the marinas are providing proper information as to why we're doing what we're doing. And then we do plankton tows in the lake to discover quagga and zebra mussels. It's just a net that goes in the water and tries to collect those little microscopic juvenile stage of quagga mussels. And nothing has been discovered in the 16+ years we've been doing this program now. And then we also have these artificial substrates. I don't think we've shown a picture of these before. So this is an artificial substrate that are placed in, I think, about a dozen locations around the lake, Fallen Leaf and Echo. And they are just artificial substrates where quagga mussels might hide or attach. And similar with New Zealand mud snails, this is also a monitoring method for New Zealand mud snails as well. And so that's Tom Booz there checking one of the substrates within the Tahoe Keys. And then with control, we want to make sure we're having measurable metrics. So you'll be hearing from us in the near future, talking about updating our thresholds. This is an effort for the entire agency, but for aquatic invasive species, we want to make sure we have measurable metrics, not just metrics that measure work and effort. So right now we do acres treated, but now we want to move to, we'll still keep that because acres treated is like wildfire. You might have to repeat those treatments over time to make sure you're maintaining that as zero. And so we want to also then include how do we track our success by reducing actual abundance of invasive species. So that stay tuned on that. But this is an example of one of the monitoring methods. This is some of our lake-wide transects. These are just some examples of where these transects are. There's 108 of them established throughout the lake. This was done in 2018 when we conducted our first lake-wide monitoring and then also developed a plan so it's repeatable over time. And each the transects cover every tributary, every marina, an embayment that it's like marina-like where you might have an enclosed area. And then some of them are just randomized, but then maintained over time. And this year, so we did these transects this year. That was actually planned for previous years, but with funding just inconsistencies, we had to do it this year. But we also are now able to incorporate another test of a method called sonar. That heat map you saw for the Tahoe Keys has been used in the Keys quite a bit. Now we're testing it out in the lake itself. And so this is just an example of where we tested it on the South Shore this year, just outside the Keys. So you can see that green heading out towards like a 10 o'clock position. That's the boating channel of the Tahoe Keys. And not surprisingly, it's showing a pretty high density of weeds, but it's a more fine level of monitoring versus the lake-wide, which is just a transect and one line. So we're getting that information now. The divers and contractors have just finished up. And then moving into New Zealand mud snails, that response that we've been undertaking. So we've done quite a bit of work over the last month and a half. And just as a reminder, I think Julie had provided a brief update shortly after the discovery and her executive director report. But we've been working pretty fast paced with lots of different partners. And as a reminder, these were discovered on September 6th, just offshore of the Truckee River, about 2,000 feet offshore, so not just offshore. By our contracted divers performing what we call site assessment work, which is more or less a pre-treatment survey of weeds that was occurring in this offshore area. Those divers notified TRPA and Tahoe RCD immediately, started taking samples for identification, and we implemented our rapid response plan. We formed an incident team of both TRPA and Tahoe RCD, with Tom Booz on our staff serving as our incident commander. Fortunately, he has previous experience in this world. When he was with the state of Montana, they had a discovery of quagga mussels that he led that effort on a rapid response. So we're fortunate to have that experience to really guide us on this process. We did get the species confirmation, both visually and by genetics, that it is the New Zealand mud snail. So we did our appropriate notifications to our state partners and Fish and Wildlife Service, and then to the rest of the world as well. We then expanded our surveillance our monitoring to identify a broader delineation from the point of discovery. So we did a grid survey, and those transects I mentioned were already happening for plants. So we modified those to give us a better chance to then see if we're able to detect New Zealand mud snails at a lake-wide scale. So we repeated some of those. Basically, they're just going deeper and slower. Normally, they're at about 3 to 4 meters above the surface, above the bottom when they're doing plant surveys. Now they're about 1 to 2 feet above the surface to be able to better detect them. As you can see, they're very, very small. And then we engaged the Science Council. with Dan Segan and Bob Larson, coordinated a team of experts, not only locally but nationally, on New Zealand mud snails, and were able to give us some recommendations that we'll talk about. But just a little bit of history on these things. They're super small. That's an example of them in some of the palm of somebody's hands. They're about size of grain of rice. These are not anywhere near as devastating as quagga and zebra mussels, but they do have impacts similar to other invasives where they outcompete native species, and sometimes fish eat them, and they're definitely a poor source of nutrition. So sometimes in other areas, you'll see native fish that have poor health. They were first discovered in the United States in 1987 in the Snake River in Idaho, and subsequently in California in the Owens River Valley in 2000. And then since that time, the closest discovery is in the lower Truckee near Reno. They can live in a variety of habitats, but as their name suggests, they do like muddy conditions. So when we did discover this and the announcements were made, we just happened to be at our Western Regional Panel on aquatic invasives at that time, and we're able to engage with a lot of partners, and that's actually, we're able to talk with them to serve on that technical advisory committee that the Science Council formed, and they were all very surprised of where we found them. They thought we would have found them in the river first, and so far we have not seen them in the river at all, but they're actually in 20 feet of water up to almost 100 feet of water, and so that's very surprising to a lot of our partners, but obviously they can live in a variety of habitats. And they're spread primarily by recreation. Fishing is one of the major and non-motorized recreation. Felt boots, that's been an issue in the country for quite some time, trying to get away from using felt boots and waders, but it's a safety issue as well for anglers. There's just not a better material that protects them. So we're looking at ways to engage with all of our different partners and users on best ways to prevent spread. And as I mentioned, they have impacts similar to other invasives where they outcompete and alter the food web. So actions since that initial discovery and our engagement with the Science Council, the picture here shows them at 91 feet, again, very small and within that filamentous algae. But we reviewed our existing monitoring data that we collect every year. Beth Volmer on our team does lots of stream surveys throughout the basin at every tributary, doing what's called a kick survey, where they get in the water and kick up the bottom and have nets and collect everything that goes through it. And we've confirmed with the lab that reviews all that data that no mud snails have ever been discovered in any of those samples. And then we also looked at the keys data that we have been collecting for the last 2+ years, all the rake pulls they pull up with the weeds to check for efficacy of those treatments, and nothing were found in those as well. And I'll talk more about what we've done since then. But we've established new decontamination protocols to treat Tahoe now as a positive water body for New Zealand mud snails. So that requires an automatic decontamination if somebody's coming back to us. And then we have a responsibility to our Western partners, so we let them know that Tahoe is now New Zealand mud snail positive, so when a boat comes to them, they're aware. And then we've re-emphasized existing rules we have on the books. Pull your plug. You're required to pull your drain plug as you leave the water body. It's consistent with Nevada state law and an equivalent on the California side where you have a requirement to be clean, drain, and dry. But we have that code as well. That was established in 2018, I believe, to make sure you're pulling your plug as you leave the boat ramp. So any water is drained and you're not transporting it to other places in the lake, and certainly not leaving the lake as well. Lots of additional outreach, working closely with our marina partners to make sure they're all aware. There's some fortunateness to the timing of the discovery, since boating season is now coming to an end, or more or less is at an end, but now we're ramping up what our strategies are for next year. And then looking at the recommendations by the Science Council, I believe we put a link into that report in the staff report as well. It sits on the Tahoe Science Advisory Council's website, but doing an expanded delineation to really better understand how far that infestation went. And then really an emphasis to focus on containment versus control. Most places elsewhere do not do any type of control other than trying to limit the spread and do lots of outreach. So Tahoe is going to be at the forefront of whatever management actions we take, because other places don't do much about it. And then doing other risk assessments for additional species, which was also a recommendation within our action agenda. And just coincidentally, we have started that process even before we had the discovery of New Zealand mud snails. So we're looking at additional species and what risk they pose to the lake. So this is that expanded grid survey. All the red dots, the colored dots are locations of where these points where New Zealand mud snails were discovered. The initial stretch was about 3 miles from Pope Marsh to Ski Run, and the Science Council Technical Advisory Team recommended expanding that. So we have about a 10-mile linear grid survey from Emerald Point or Eagle Point. I can never get it straight, but that eastern point of Emerald Bay all the way over to Nevada Beach. And so no detections on those outer stretches, but one detection over by Camp Rich in the buoy field. So it's a bit of an anomaly, still needing to understand how that may have got there, but it seems to be confined to the South Shore. The lake-wide transects throughout the lake did not detect anything other than the transects that bifurcate this area. And another strong recommendation by the Science Council is to do additional types of monitoring called environmental DNA monitoring. And so this is able to detect biological pieces of these species. It's used quite a bit for presence and absence of various species. And so the Forest Service has experience doing this, so we were able to take advantage of that, and they're actually doing it as we speak. So up the river, even though our visual surveys have not seen anything, they're very hard to find. And so eDNA is a really good indicator of presence. So we're collecting that information as we speak. We did additional surveys in the Keys just to make sure. So we did find them on the marina side, but close to the channel entrance. So we believe that it's likely coming in from that infestation, not coming from the Keys itself, but nothing on the homeowner side. And strategizing our future priorities, monitoring is certainly a major component. So we want to repeat everything we did this year with grid surveys, eDNA, and those transects, looking at our prevention and containment, those CD3 machines that the CD3 machine we were able to purchase through the league. We have additional funding from bipartisan infrastructure that focuses on non-motorized clean drain and dry activities, looking at ramp infrastructure. Many of our marinas have required drains similar to a driveway trench, drainage trench, and trying to put those in other areas to when you're draining those bilge and ballast tanks so it's not going back into the lake. And then certainly additional outreach. This is going to be a major component of our future actions. And looking at our prevention budget, our program budget overall, pre-New Zealand mud snails, prevention's about $2.5 million annually. We have a potential gap of about 200,000. We were not successful in a grant this past year with the state of California. It's a Department of Boating and Waterways grant. There's just more and more entities applying, which is good for us because that means more lakes close to us are being protected, but it's a potential gap there if we don't use Lake Tahoe Restoration Act funding. And control action agenda suggests a $7 million annual need. And as I mentioned, we're about halfway there. So we have a gap of about half, 3 to 4 million. And lake-wide monitoring, we spend about 200,000 currently every 3 years. So with mud snail, some of those actions that we want to take, we're looking at annual costs. One-time cost for capital improvements of any of those ramp infrastructure with drainage or these CD3 machines or cleaning stations. Those are one-time capital costs. And then roving inspectors is something we've identified as a way to help enhance prevention overall, not just for New Zealand mud snails, but for any species that we're concerned about. So that's about $100,000 annual add. And then with monitoring, if we now want to do that on an annual basis and include New Zealand mud snails, we're looking at about a $300,000 annual need there. And then for additional outreach, those additional signage and advertising, maybe about $30,000 in a one-time cost. And that does not account for any staffing needs to non-seasonal staffing needs that we may need. So anything we do in response to New Zealand mud snails is going to be an add-on, and we're already underfunded, especially in control. But the funding strategies, reviewing the fee structure that will come to you in January at the Operations Committee. We want to leverage our existing programs that we have to do some of these New Zealand mud snail and other activities or other invasives that we're worried about. So all of these monitoring and outreach and CD3 machines are going to put us in a better position regardless of the species. We want to expand or increase new funding opportunities. The federal government just provided national rapid response funding. So that's something we might have access to for this New Zealand mud snail response. And certainly Lake Tahoe Restoration Act reauthorization is going to be a priority. And then continuing the bipartisan infrastructure law. We've been very fortunate to get that money, one of only 2 entities throughout the country to get that for natural resource needs. And that has funded very significant projects for the program. And with that, questions?
Well, thank you. And thanks for the incredible response effort, right? I mean,
We have a great team.
well, thank you for your leadership on that.
Thank
too,
you. I
Dennis.
appreciate
So
that.
Appreciate that. Okay, questions, board members in the room first? Brooke first?
Thank you, Mr. Zabaglo. Great presentation.
Thank you.
You never even looked at notes or anything. My question is with regards to the Tahoe Keys Marina. We were able to go out on a tour on the TRPA boat and learned a lot. One of the things we learned is the great personnel that's now involved with the marina and their willingness to invest in AIS, but we were told at the time that, was it Liberty? Wasn't able to bring power to be able to get that turbidity curtain
The
going.
bubble curtain,
Is
yeah.
that still an issue?
Yes, unfortunately, through funding with the Tahoe Fund and the league, we were able to install a bubble curtain on that marina side several years ago. And power issues have made it difficult to maintain. It shorts out, blah, blah, blah. And the league, the homeowners and the marina have been trying for a year to get that service upgraded, and it's just been a bear. So if you have any contacts with Liberty,
We gave them that day. I gave them directly. the
well, if you can
contact.
make a phone call.
Well, no, we did, but I mean,
Okay.
I think I gave it to the league and they were.
Yeah, they're
working
still
direct-
pursuing it. We met with the Keys just this week, and supposedly it's happening soon to upgrade that service that will allow that bubble curtain to be on all the time.
I'll follow up with you.
Thank you.
after. Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah,
Oh.
the new marina owners have
Oh,
been
I'm sorry,
fantastic to
Shelley,
work with.
Shelley and then John.
Yeah, great presentation, Dennis. I'm assuming that the juveniles, the New Zealand mud snail juveniles can be detected by the same sampling method we use for other invasive species.
It's not the same. They have eggs.
No. Are they asexual?
They are asexual, so they can reproduce sexually and asexually. So you only need one, but they do produce eggs, and they tend to sit more on the bottom. So some of those plankton toads we do aren't necessarily a way to detect them.
Right.
We're still investigating that. That's not something people typically use. The eDNA is certainly good in streams because there's a lot of material for that stuff to attach to. In the lake itself, not as much. We're fortunate to have Dr. Jardy, who's an eDNA expert, formerly with UNR, has worked with Sudeep very closely, is now with UC Santa Barbara. But for the lake itself, we don't have a lot of stuff floating. That's why it's so clear. So there's nothing for it to attach to. So you need lots and lots and lots of water to filter through to be able to have a fair chance. But we're working with them to see if there's things we could do to improve that efficacy of detection. But eDNA in the rivers is certainly something you want to look at, and those visual surveys and the substrates are going to be primary methods within the lake itself.
Okay, and this is not directly related to invasive species, but somebody was telling me, and I don't know if there's any validity to it, that the fish migration was interrupted this year by the timing of the work at the mouth of Taylor Creek. Is that true?
Fake news.
Fake news.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, the Forest Service had to turn the dam off for like a day, I think, to clear out some beaver dam stuff. Sorry. Spawning has happened, still ongoing as we speak, but yeah, no impact whatsoever.
Okay, so our bearers are not
They are fine.
protesting. Okay, all right.
Okay, Vince, I'm sorry, John first, then Vince.
Thank you for your presentation, Dennis. Could you just talk about what the current assessment is of the problem of transport of AIS from hotspots lake-wide from motorboats?
And as far as existing species within the lake itself?
Yes. Yeah, domestic transport. We're doing the intercepting, inspection stations of boats coming in. I know in your action plan, you talked about some monthly monitoring at marina slips and rental boats. I don't know if that's for sure happening, if we have the budget for it, but I guess the larger question is how much of a problem is transport of AIS from hotspots elsewhere and spread that way?
It's certainly a vector, and some of the actions that we take to mitigate that, certainly at the Keys, you have the boat backup station on the homeowner side that allows any fragment or any pieces of plants to come off the boat before they go out. And then those bubble curtains, when they're operating, serve as a barrier to prevent additional spread outwards from the Keys. But then in addition, that pull your plug requirement is a way to ensure, is a way to mitigate spread through other areas of the lake. Fragments or Asian clam villagers or now New Zealand mud snail eggs could be within those waters. And so draining that boat as it's coming out is a requirement, both at the code level and at the state level. And then the seal inspectors at all of the marinas are trained to look for any attached plants on boats and trailers as they leave. And so pulling your plug and looking at the boats and trailers is a requirement to get a seal before they leave.
So those sound like good mitigation measures, but you have, then there's, of course, there's enforcement. Do you know how many boats participated in the voluntary backup station at Tahoe Keys Marina and or in the Keys, I guess, and not Tahoe Keys Marinas, we're not doing it. So, how much are they doing it there? Should they be doing it at every hotspot? How is it enforced? And then again, despite all that, how big of a problem is it of kind of domestic transport within the lake,
As far as enforcement with a backup station,
Yeah, and
It's
knowing that there are
voluntary.
other hotspots too, where they're not doing backup stations, and then just again, do we have a sense of how big of a problem it is in general? Boats
we
taking
don't
little
have,
fragments on propellers and spreading them.
we don't have actual metrics on, to see what's on a boat if it doesn't go through a boat backup station. Certainly that is a risk, and that's why we do all of our surveillance monitoring and lake-wide monitoring on presumably on an annual basis in the future to ensure that we're detecting anything if it becomes a bigger problem for spread.
And are those monthly inspections? Is that happening, or is that dependent on more budget for that?
I'm not sure.
I
what
thought
you're
in the
referring to as
Tahoe
monthly.
AIS action plan, it talked about monthly inspection of marina boats and marina slips and rental boats.
I'm not
Or
familiar with that. We do
Okay.
have our marina management plans where they're required to implement activities to reduce spread, reduce risk, reduce habitat if possible, where they're doing checks of their marinas on a regular basis, skimming if necessary, if they have existing aquatic invasive species. So that's something we're working with them on to build that in a more robust way. But then also partners such as the league doing eyes on the lake training at all the marinas, and which would be a requirement at some equivalent for compliance with our AIS marina management plans.
I guess the final related question is to do adequate monitoring and containment and prevention to, are the fees on boats adequate to cover that monitoring of boating activity?
Monitoring of boating activity, that's
The AIS portion of it.
we're going to be bringing the fee schedule in January. They're still assessing the budget needs for next year as we speak. The season just ended, so we're collecting all of our data. So we'll have better answers for that in the coming months.
Okay, thanks.
Oh,
Thank
and there is the shoreline fee. Yes, thank you.
Yes.
That was part of the shoreline program. There's a $10 fee that goes towards monitoring. So we do use that for surveillance. That goes to our contractors to do surveillance where we're hitting all of the hotspots or previous locations where we know invasives have occurred, in addition to those lake transects and the Eyes on the Lake program.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, John. Vince?
Yeah, I mean, this seems incredibly critical and time sensitive. If you know, as things get more out of control, the costs get greater and greater, and it gets harder and harder to stuff that genie back in the bottle. And we're short on money, it sounds like, to treat it. What are we looking at different funding mechanisms right now? What could, I think we have to look at what we could be doing to get that funded so that we can, you know, I don't want to just keep these things barely in control. Like, we've got to get rid of this stuff. I mean, the keys, maybe we can't. But if that's just one hotspot, that seems a lot easier to manage than having hotspots all over the lake. So what can we do as a board? What can we change to make sure we get rid of this stuff?
Yeah, funding certainly is, you know, a critical need to implement projects, increase that pace and scale, additional monitoring where it's appropriate. Lake Tahoe Restoration Act reauthorization is priority number one. We are been fortunate, as I mentioned, with the bipartisan infrastructure law to have money for the next several years that is filling in gaps. As I mentioned, there's the new rapid response plan that we're going to investigate to fill in gaps that we're expending for this New Zealand mud snail response, but then also additional any other types of grants that may become available. But we do have funding from the state at a general fund level. If there's opportunities there, potentially that has not increased. We get about 750,000 from the two states to provide that support for the AIS program, but then also our fee structure. So we have to look at every revenue source that we have and take a critical look there.
I mean, could we put that as a to-do to look at how we can get there and get there soon? I think,
Yes.
I don't know,
Yep.
is everyone else
Yes.
semi-terrified about this?
If I could add to that, Kim Carringer for the record. I think a good way to think about the funding need that we need in aquatic invasive species is if you look at the overall EIP funding model, we have a good federal anchor right now with LTRA, the Lake Tahoe Restoration Act. If we work hard to reauthorize it, we are getting, you know, around 5 million a year right now.
On average, it's been
on
about 3 to
average.
4, but this last appropriation, excuse me, I think is close to 5.
Okay, great. And so what we'd like to, if the annual need for control is 7, we need to try to fill in the gap with the state, local, private match, right? So knowing everyone's interested, I would like to take that to the EIP committee and really look at how the state, local, private matches is complementing that federal anchor. And I think it'd be great to strategize with the committee on that.
Great, thank you. I had one question and then I'll go to our board members online. How deep do we think these can survive? Do we have any scientific data on that?
I think the literature suggests up to 200 feet,
Wow.
150. And we did
Yeah.
find them at 150. It's
Wow.
on the South Shore. There's that shelf. It drops
Right.
off quite a bit. That kind of fan that comes out from the river. They were just there, not in great numbers. It's possible that they kind of tumbled off of that shelf where they found them.
Mhm.
Most of it is in that 20 to 90 foot range is where we've seen them.
Okay, great, thank you. Shelley?
So as a source of additional funding, where do people typically, well, let's use South Shore, where do they get their fishing licenses? They get them from the state, they're issued by the state, right, or Department of
Correct.
Wildlife,
Mhm.
right? And is any money from the revenues, could any of that be diverted to the control of invasive species, since there is a connection apparently between the New Zealand's mud snails
There
and
is,
recreational fishing?
Believe it's a federal act that puts some revenues from sales of bait and tackle and angling gear that can go to the states. We are not eligible for those fundings, but both states get it and we get money from the states. So
Oh, okay, all right, but no
you know,
direct
no
allocation.
direct allocation, correct?
That's something that we can lobby for.
Potentially.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, I think
Thank
it's
you.
called the Dingle-Johnson Act.
And then I wanted to go to our board members online. Do any of you have questions? Alex, Cisco, Ashley, Haley?
Way
Chime in.
beyond my brain power.
I just appreciate all the information and the update too on the Keys project. It's really helpful. And if there's any way we can help with trying to rally that funding at the state or federal level, please let us know.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I would just echo that. I'd be really eager to be plugged into any follow-up and see how we can help from the state level.
Sounds like we got a meeting that's gonna get scheduled.
Yes, yeah. Subcommittee on funding, I think. Funding us. Great. I don't seen any other hands there. Any follow-up, final questions from the board? Well, again, Dennis, to you and your team, thank you so much for your incredible leadership on this and attacking this issue.
Thank you.
Head on. We look forward to those discussions and the help that we can be at both states, the federal government, and local sources to raise these funds that are needed to tackle this issue. So.
The process, do we need to do public comment?
No,
Oh, okay.
we
perfect.
don't. We already read that into the record that
Okay.
the public comment will come at the end of the meeting
Cool.
on our information items. So with that, this was an information item only. And thanks again for incredible work that you're all doing.
And we will certainly keep you posted, and thank you for all your support. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Julie, you wanted to wrap up this one?
Yeah, that would be great, Madam Chair. Thank you, Julie Reagan here. Just to underscore the discussion and to build on Kim Carringer's suggestion, we'll take as an action item just a review of the overall funding gaps. And we will prioritize, as Kim said, for the first newly constituted EIP committee meeting in January, a discussion around that. And just to remind the board, this program is one of the signature EIP programs overall. And if Shelley will remember several years back, the beginning funding for the Aquatic Invasive Species Program came from the federal government, from the Army Corps of Engineers, from the Southern Nevada Public Land Management Act. And then we hit a fiscal cliff when that ran out, and the two states came together to add appropriations to support the prevention program. The private community came together, the Tahoe Fund, the League to Save Lake Tahoe, the boaters themselves. We have this vast partnership around the program. And it's one of the highest levels of funding that we've been getting from the Lake Tahoe Restoration Act and the infrastructure law. But even with that, we're still short and costs continue to rise. So we'll take a comprehensive look at that, and we look forward to bringing that action item back to you.
Thank you so much. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to item 6B. This is again an information item on Destination Stewardship Plan, update on the Lake Tahoe Destination Stewardship Plan and implementation. Information on this item can be found on page 121 of your board packet. And again, as a reminder to the public, since no action is being taken on this item, any member of the public is welcome to comment during our final public comment period. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Devin to start us off and welcome both Amy and Carol to the dais up here with us. So.
Thank you, Chair Gustafson. Devin Middlebrook, TRPA for the record. Today we'll be talking to you about the Lake Tahoe Destination Stewardship Plan. We were here back in May to give you a preview of the plan, which was released in June. So it's great timing to come back. And just as a reminder for context, TRPA and our Bi-State Compact does call for us to do recreation planning to ensure fair share access to our recreation assets and make sure people have a great time while doing it. We also have recreation threshold standards that measure and to achievement towards those goals, and sustainable recreation is one of the focus areas along with transportation in the environmental improvement program. So lots of connections to this space for TRPA and why our agency is involved in this. And then to show the power of the partnership behind the Destination Stewardship Plan, I'm joined by Amy Berry with the Tahoe Fund and Carol Chaplin with the Lake Tahoe Visitors Authority. And I'll turn it over to Amy to start our presentation.
Thank you, Devin. Thank you, Chairwoman. It's great to be here today. Thank you for having us. I think I'll start with the first slide, actually. Well, that's the very first slide, I guess. We're here to talk about the Lake Tahoe Destination Stewardship Plan, as Devin said. So I'll kick us off with sort of the background. How did we get here? How did we decide that we needed something called the Lake Tahoe Destination Stewardship Plan? Carol will take you through how we actually developed the plan, the stakeholder input, and then Devin will run us through what's in the plan, because it's really important to all of us that this is not a plan that we completed, that we all patted ourselves on the back, put on the shelf and never did anything with. That this is really about an action plan where you're going to see some real differences around the lake pretty soon, I think, which is great. So let's start with some statistics. I think many of you have seen this, but we have a $4.5 billion direct economy, which is about $10 billion in economic impact from our tourism and outdoor recreation economy. Our latest numbers, and I will say these numbers need improving. We seem to land in different places every day, but 17 million visitor days from 2 million unique visitors. And we're surrounded by ever-growing population areas, 27% population growth projected in Nevada and Northern California at the same time. So I think it's not news to you that Tahoe has always sort of suffered from its own popularity, been challenged by its own popularity. I think that's in fact why the TRPA was created in the first place. And I don't think that was ever more evident than during the pandemic. COVID really just shone a light on that. In a time where you couldn't go to your local park, you couldn't go to the mall, you couldn't go to Disneyland, you couldn't go to Hawaii, you could come to Lake Tahoe. And we know that it was really important for people to seek refuge to beautiful outdoor places for their physical and mental health. But it definitely created some challenges, as we saw quite publicly in the media, challenges for our land managers, challenges for our residents, and challenges for the environment. But one good thing I think that came out of this was it forced an entirely new collaboration to come together. What started very organically was every week, a whole bunch of people would get on a call because every day it seemed like the regulations were changing around COVID. And as you know, we're 2 states, the federal government, and 5 counties and a city. So if you're a visitor, you could walk 10 feet from one side of a path to another path and have an entirely different set of rules, which made it really challenging to help manage this at a time where we were seeing an influx of visitors, where we were being asked to socially distance. So there was a lot of tension in the system. And everybody came together in a very open way to say, how are you handling this, and what's working for you and what's not working, and how can we collaborate a bit better? So it was a group that had never really come together before. It was land managers that often come together under the EIP, combined with our friends at the visitors authorities, the business community, law enforcement was at the table, NGOs like the Tahoe Fund at the table, all sort of saying, how do we help? It was a bit chaotic in the summer of 2020, if you recall. We got through the summer. And then we all took some time to pause and reflect. And we decided to hold a workshop. TRPA and Tahoe Fund helped put together a workshop on Zoom for about 70 people. And it was really a moment to say, what just happened? Can we process what went on? How much of it was COVID driven, and how much is kind of here to stay, or has been here to stay for a long time? And it was during that workshop that Carol, I remember, said, you know, we've just never had a shared vision for tourism and outdoor recreation in Tahoe. We have so many different people kind of under this one big umbrella, but we've never all agreed to which way we're rowing in the boat. And after that workshop, it was really clear that we needed to have a shared vision, a shared mission, and a plan for how we were going to better manage people, how we were going to sustain a really vibrant economy, how we we're going to take care of our local community, and most importantly, take care of our local environment. And that's ultimately what led to the Destination Stewardship Plan. And this is just a quick timeline of some things that have gone on. So back in 2018, we started talking about this term sustainable recreation. That was kind of a new idea, not just recreation, but sustainable recreation. Then, as I mentioned, the pandemic kind of brought everybody together to work together. Then we held the Sustainable Rec and Tourism Workshop. And we've really transitioned from sustainable recreation to destination stewardship. And I think it's an important note that destination stewardship is much, much bigger than sustainable recreation. Sustainable recreation is important. It's really the infrastructure on the ground of how we're going to manage people. Destination stewardship is kind of the whole big puzzle of people visiting. So it's not just trails, it's transportation, it's housing, it's looking at the environmental improvements that are required. It's marketing, it's messaging, it's what's the visitors authority doing to drive people here or not drive people here and change messaging. So that ultimately led us to hiring consultants. A number of organizations chipped in to raise a little over $200,000 to bring the consultants in. And then ultimately we launched a destination stewardship plan in June. And now we have developed a destination stewardship council that flows out of that plan, which is 17 different organizations, mostly made up of the folks who helped build the plan, but the addition of Vail Resorts and Palisades to the council as well. So I will turn it over to Carol to take you through how do you build a plan for some place like Tahoe with these huge numbers of people visiting and huge challenges and such a broad partnership.
Thanks, Amy. For the record, Carol Chaplin, Lake Tahoe Visitors Authority. Thanks, Chair Gustafson and the board and staff for having us here. I want to preface this by saying we had huge support from TRPA staff. Thank you, Julie, for that.
Yeah.
And from the very beginning, because we're just a bunch of people at this table that Amy said it very well originally. It's not the same table. We built this table, and it's a little bit different when you look at some of the organizations that have been interested in and participated in this process. So we really appreciate that backbone that we got early on, because we were floundering a little bit. What do we do? How do we do it? How do we respond to this new tourism dynamic? And we managed to bring 17 different organizations together originally. You'll see them all there. And we also have 200 stakeholders on monthly calls that are still meeting today and are discussing the same topics that will come to us as a council. As Amy mentioned, we now have Vail Resorts and Palisades. So we have two very important outdoor recreation organizations joining this effort. So when we started this process, the consultants helped us bring together our residents and our visitors, and then we had discussion groups that were broken down by categories. For instance, recreation providers or lodging providers, all kinds of different. I think we had 15. How did we get to 15? I thought it was 10. Anyway, wow. Now I'm really tired. And we had huge responses, you can imagine. I mean, our residents were really, after the pandemic, we were all surprised at what came out of this particular time period, which we hope we don't have to ever revisit. But over 1,100 respondents to the resident survey, the 2,300 responses to the visitor survey that came through the destination marketing organizations that were part of this process, and we sent out those surveys to our databases. So 2,300 is a really good sample, one of the best that we've ever done. So very accurate information. And then we identified leaders and stakeholders around the basin to engage in one-on-one interviews, and then these discussion groups, and then lots of workshops with over 300 participants, very passionate about what we were doing, and still very interested today to see where our next steps will be. In the resident survey, 4 out of 5 of these residents rated the quality of life, no surprise here, better than other places. So I think they're going to stay, and that 3 out of 7 of them agree that tourism and outdoor recreation is critically important. But only 21% of the residents really feel that tourism and recreation support their lifestyle and help them have a strong sense of community. So we have some real work to do here. And then this number, 88% of our visitors said that it was important in their destination choice that there was some type of environmental stewardship, some culture of environmental stewardship. That number has actually increased recently, according to our data. It's over 90% now. And as a matter of fact, just kind of a side note for the Visitors Authority, we are now specifically targeting markets that have this high index for sustainability consciousness. They tend to spend more money in a destination. They like to spend locally and support local businesses, which is good for us if they come to visit our destination, because we have a lot of small businesses as opposed to the big box. So that's really good news for us. As for instance, the Northwest tends to index very high. And so we are spending money there, and we are mixing our messages. come here, it's great, it's beautiful. And then on the other hand, some of our messages are very specifically, come here, it's great, and leave it a better place. So we're starting to mix those sustainability messages in. 82% say they do their part when they visit a destination like Lake Tahoe to keep it clean and pure. And 71% believe they're mindful and respectful of the natural environment. We didn't necessarily see that during COVID. So that one kind of surprised me. I think we need to do a little bit more digging there. And I think this next statistic is really accolades to the TRPA, that they feel that we're doing an excellent job of safeguarding natural resources. I think we have a good reputation, but I'm not sure that we're quite as well. Okay, we're good. 42% feel that we're good, almost 50%. I'm going to turn it over to Devin.
Thank you, Carol. And now I'll take you through how we've used this stakeholder input, the background information of how we got here that Amy mentioned, into the shape of our plan. Our very, very pretty glossy picture of our stewardship plan. But as Amy said, a plan isn't going to pick up trash or direct traffic, and the plan really is about action. And we finally have that shared vision for sustainable recreation destination stewardship in the region, where Tahoe is a cherished place, welcoming to all, where people, communities, and nature benefit from a thriving tourism and outdoor recreation economy. This vision is supported by 4 strategic pillars that you see around. The first one being fostering a tourism economy that gives back. And we were very intentional about making this our first priority pillar, because we understand that the economy is the lifeblood of our community. And if our tourism economy is not giving back to our community members through wages, jobs, security like that, housing, that we really don't have anything. So that needs to be the cornerstone. Our local communities and neighbors need to be the cornerstone of this plan. We want to turn this shared vision into a shared action. I'll touch on that on my next slide. We want to improve the Tahoe experience for all. This is, as Amy said, is that infrastructure piece, the bike paths, the facilities at recreation sites, the transit to and from those recreation sites, making sure that our businesses have vibrant downtowns, really improving that experience through infrastructure to make sure that people are having a great time, and really preventing the bad behavior in the first place. Instead of begging people to not litter, make it impossible for them to litter in the first place, and really think about how you solve the problem differently. And then advancing a culture of taking care and really getting everyone bought into that Tahoe way of doing things. The Take Care Tahoe campaign is a great example of how we're doing this already. Under the pillar of turning that shared vision into shared action, the plan called for 5 initial steps towards governance. While governance isn't always the most flashy thing, it's very important that we set up the proper structures to really get the plan implemented in the most efficient and expeditious way possible. So we've already established that Destination Stewardship Council. The folks and the partners that were involved in creating the plan, plus additional members, are going to be part of that new Stewardship Council that will oversee the direction and implementation of the plan. We now have hired our first managing director for the council. So Nettie Pardue, who's a Myers resident, is now our managing director. She may be listening in on Zoom right now. And she most recently was executive director of Outward Bound California. So comes with years of experience in the outdoor space, nonprofit management, facilitation, collaboration building. So in addition to her being a Tahoe resident, we think she's going to be a great fit. She's already hit the ground running. We're working on securing funding and other resources to support the council's structure and also implement the priority actions in the plan. We're also working on establishing action teams to tackle many of the actions in the strategic plan, whether there's an action team around infrastructure and infrastructure projects, funding, communications, et cetera, really working towards implementing the plan. And then a communication strategy and making sure that people are not only aware of the plan and the progress that we're making, but also are able to see themselves as part of the overall strategy and really see their own ownership over destination stewardship for the region. And again, really want to highlight that this isn't just a planning process with more ideas and more plans to come. It really is about action. Since we've been operating the monthly, or was weekly, then bi-weekly, and now monthly calls around our response for recreation and destination stewardship, we've been implementing a lot of programs. So we've got Mr. Friedrich, the city of South Lake Tahoe has their plastic water bottle ban, which is a great step towards that. Many of the partners on North Shore, Placer County, Incline Village really helped us expand Clean Tahoe, our litter mitigation program. So now Clean Tahoe is picking up litter lake-wide, really, again, cleaning up after some of the visitors that aren't doing their part. Microtransit services, Take Care campaign, volunteer programs, the North Tahoe Community Alliance, one of Carol's counterparts on the North Shore, just gave out $20 million in community grants that are funded by tourism in the district through their new tourism business improvement district, and are going to things like transportation, microtransit, litter management, housing. So again, in terms of a circular economy that gives back to the community, this is a great example. Tourism dollars are staying locally and being spent to mitigate the impacts of tourism. This is a shining example of how it's done. And then the Tahoe Conservancy has also been giving grants for equitable access projects to the lake. So making sure that no one's being left behind in this process. So where we're at now, we're doing a lot of public outreach for the plans. So we've been making the rounds at various conferences, boards, and commissions. We were just at the South Lake Tahoe City Council. This month, we'll be coming to El Dorado County supervisors in January, and I'm in discussions with Placer County on getting an agenda item on theirs. Washoe County, we'd love to come visit you. So if any of you have a board, a commission, a community group, a service club, anyone you think that would be interested in this information, we'd love to come talk to them and continue, again, building, not so it's just us and our organizations and partners doing this plan, but everyone in the community is doing their part to help implement the plan. And like all things at Tahoe, shared funding is how we're going to get things done. So I wanted to recognize the long list of partners on that slide who have either helped fund the planning process, or funding implementation of the plan, or both. So right now we're at over $330,000 for the next 2 years to help implement the plan. And that number is growing as people continue to contribute. So, the money is where, put your money where your mouth is, and local organizations and partners are stepping up and showing how important this is with their wallets. So it's really important, and want to make sure that folks are recognized for that. And then finally, just bringing back the connection to TRPA and the Environmental Improvement Program. As I mentioned in the opening, sustainable recreation and transportation is one of the focus areas of the EIP. And we're going to be working through destination stewardship and the EIP program to really marry the two processes, recognizing that destination stewardship is somewhat broader than just the sustainable recreation aspects of the EIP, but making sure we're working in tandem and in coordination to identify the correct infrastructure projects, recreation access projects, and connect that to funding. So with that, we will turn it back to you, Chair Gustafson, for board questions.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Amy and Carol and Devin, for a great presentation and your leadership in this space of really putting this program together, convening all the groups, and really setting forth a good direction. I have a number of comments, but I'm going to go to my fellow board members first. So starting here, Shelley?
I don't know who wants to respond to this, but at one of our shopping centers in the Bay Area, we've been now using solar powered trash compactors called Clean Cubes, which so it is continually compacting the garbage. I mean, they're larger than the average trash can, but is that something that you've given some thought to?
Absolutely, and they're already out on the ground. So
Oh,
the city of South Lake Tahoe, I believe, has 10 or 12 of them. North Shore, Placer County has them as well, and ours are, at least on the South Shore, I'm not sure about the North Shore, are connected to the internet. So they even text message the maintenance staff when they're full, so you don't waste a bunch of time having someone go out, check the can. It's not ready to be emptied. So definitely one of the innovative measures that we've already implemented, and I'm sure there's demand for more of them, but thanks for that suggestion.
Go ahead.
There you go.
That's right.
Yeah.
Amy Berry, for the record, it's a great example of a collaboration that the council brings together. So we knew that South Lake Tahoe was doing it. Tahoe City PUD and Placer County signed up. And then Nevada State Parks was on the call going, wait, what are these things? How could we do this? So I think they're going to be coming to the East Shore Trail pretty soon too.
Thank you.
Brooke?
Thank you. Great presentation. I was fortunate enough to participate in some of the public meetings that you had, and I was very interested in watching that process. You know, the city of South Lake Tahoe, our motto in our Parks and Recreation Department since 1965 has been all year playground. So we've always kind of known that we had that asset, but we certainly were overtaken by the casinos who had control of all the money, and it was all about, back then, casinos and skiing, but we knew we had more to offer, and COVID-19 certainly was a catalyst. I've lived here my whole life. Mr. Middlebrook, you were born and raised here. I'm shocked by the number of 21% of people that think that they somehow have some dependency on the tourism market if you live here in Tahoe. And we were always taught back in the day that no matter what you did, and my family was in photography, even though the tourist may not have been your direct client, it was because of the tourists that we were able to live here, and we depended on the locals for a lot of what we did. But we always knew and understood that we were attached. And so I'm kind of curious, with COVID-19, we saw a lot of families move into the area, but they retained their employment from wherever they came. We saw a lot of Bay Area, Southern California people doing that. Is part of that number the fact that people feel that their employment is out of the area and therefore they don't depend? And that's maybe not a question we can totally answer, but
And
it
maybe
seems like it's part of the
because that was
problem.
one of my questions. So let me follow up.
Okay.
Just how did you do the survey, and kind of how did you reach residents? Because that might indicate why.
Yeah,
as
so
well.
the survey was done as an online survey that was available in both English and Spanish and sent it out through our various partner networks. So got it out through those normal channels. I think Brooke, Supervisor Lane, you do bring up an interesting point. I think when you look back at the 2007 recession, that saw a decline in visitation, and everyone was hurting, from the frontline businesses that are restaurants and ski rentals to the dentist whose patients rely on tourism to pay their dentist bill, to get their teeth cleaned. And that was a really stark reminder that we are all connected to tourism. With the COVID-19 pandemic, we almost had the opposite challenge where, as Amy said, we were where everyone was coming. So you didn't necessarily have that direct economic impact of losing all of the visitation. It came with other challenges: litter, traffic, illegal campfires, and other pressure points on the community. So it was a little bit of a feeling. So that's something that we're still kind of wrestling with and trying to figure out how to drill down and address those concerns. But I think the impact felt was different than in previous recessions and economic upheavals, where the pain of losing tourism was felt a bit more throughout the community. I think new visitors, new residents is a factor. Folks that have remote jobs is definitely a factor. Our survey didn't get into those minute details. It's kind of hard to do with a multiple choice survey to get into those, but something we'd love to explore more.
Yep. I would just add too, I think it comes back to communication of benefits. I don't think that we collectively, when I use the word we, I mean, everyone has done a great job in demonstrably showing the benefits of tourism to people who might not be directly employed through the tourism economy. And I think that's what we were hearing. It's a bit of a balance. I think things got out of balance during COVID and just got the ire of some folks. And there's perception versus reality. I mean, we still heard this summer that it was just too busy here, but if you ask Carol, visitation was down this summer. So I think some of it is how we communicate that out. And I think that's why a big part of this plan is better communication of that. And things like what NTCA is doing on the North Shore. I mean, giving $20 million back to the community that comes directly from the tourism economy is a tremendous way to show, look what you're getting by putting up with living in a tourism economy.
Thank you.
Just real quickly, thank you so much for this presentation. I really agree that the communication element is what's going to be the success of this. The more people that buy into it, it'll be able to stand up very effectively. And I think that, as we look at the, EIP projects, how do we include destination stewardship across the board, so that it does become that consistent element that we're always thinking about, making sure that we're including it in funding proposals and all, and that it looks, it really looks at the work that's being done to ensure that every project we look at includes this model. So thank you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's really three parts of this, right? We have to support our economy, we have to take care of our local community, we have to take care of our local environment. And the EIP is the part that takes care of the local environment the most. So there wasn't an intention in the plan to redo anything that's already being done. So the plan only lives and survives based on the success of the EIP program. And there's a lot of crossover between EIP leadership and destination stewardship leadership.
Okay, I'll continue down. John, Alexis?
Thanks for the presentation. Second time seeing it. So a couple of my questions are related. To me, the bottom line is action, and Devin, you talked about that and some of the actions that have taken place. And when I look at the survey results, to me, if I guess I would think the three T's. There's tourism, trash, and traffic, and I would wager that if there were fewer impacts that people felt from visitors, I don't think people are against visitors or tourists per se, but they're against parking issues and parking alongside Emerald Bay and all the various issues that come with cars and traffic, and they're against the July 4th fiasco at Zephyr Cove, and those are high profile incidents of impacts, right? So I guess I'm a similar question to ask at council, which is when you have those examples of local actions, what do you see as the kind of the stewardship council's role in helping to replicate those actions, like copy and paste them in other jurisdictions, or help local jurisdictions adopt, say, strong actions, and also TRPA strong actions on traffic, trash, and other visitor impacts as part of the stewardship plan? So kind of how do you help decision-making bodies like ours take action to do things that are needed to mitigate tourism impacts, so we have an overall more win-win situation?
Yeah, absolutely. As we discussed at the city council meeting recently and continuing that discussion, that is the power of the council, as Amy mentioned with the compacting trash cans idea. All of a sudden, 2 or 3 jurisdictions start looking at them. We talk about it in a meeting. Other people get the light bulb and like, oh, I should do that in my jurisdiction. This city's doing it. We should do it on the Nevada side, or we should do it on the North Shore. And the power of the council and getting people together is just that information sharing, so people know what's going on. And they can, as you move into that joint implementation for the trash cans, instead of City of South Lake Tahoe ordering trash cans, Placer County ordering trash cans, Nevada State Parks ordering them, why not do one order to get bulk savings in terms of quantity? So you can start really getting that synergy together through this partnership.
I will add too, I think a big part of this plan is just better management of people. I mean, so you can look at trash as we just have people who like to litter, or you can look at it as we don't have enough trash cans, because if we had more trash cans, maybe people wouldn't litter so much. So I think what we're going to do with this plan, in each of the pillars, we're going to have working groups. And one of the working group I'm probably the most excited about is the peak demand management plan. So that's why it's great to have Vail and Palisades at the table. They're literally the experts in the industry in this, to understand, we can probably count on a calendar how many days of the year it's really crazy in Tahoe, or it just feels like it's bustling over. Maybe that's 50 days a year. So maybe we need, just like the Forest Service has an incident command when it's a high danger day, fire danger day, maybe we need an incident command strategy for peak visitor days, so that somebody told me this analogy once, I don't know if it's good or bad, but you don't build the church for Easter Sunday, right? So we can't build Tahoe for the busiest day of the year, but we can have a plan in place to know, okay, July, the obvious ones, right? July 3rd, 4th, and 5th. What are we going to do on those days that looks different on March 22nd? That's going to really help manage all of this. So I think that's a big part of it. And I would just add, I think it's really important. What's so great about this council is that it's the destination stewardship council for all of Tahoe. As soon as we start to get into our silos, we really start to lose the impact. Our visitors just don't know. If you talk to people who take 911 calls, the first thing they say is, where are you? And they say Lake Tahoe, and they say, where? They say, I don't know. And they say, well, California or Nevada, I'm not sure. So for us to expect 15 million visitors to know if they're in Placer County or El Dorado County or City of South Lake Tahoe it's just not feasible. So the more we can treat this as one place, I think the more successful we're going to be.
Thanks,
Real quick,
Alexis.
I just had a quick,
Oh.
on the car issue. Again, I would say that if we had 17 million visitor days and none of them came in a car, I mean, that would be our perfect vision. That's not realistic at this point, but till we can minimize it, right? So, more fun, less carbon. That's my slogan for you. But any thought, like when we've talked a lot here about, physical barriers along Emerald Bay or on the East Shore that hasn't happened yet, or, road diets or parking, restriction of parking areas or constant, Carol and I, you were talking about concentrating, cars where you want them to park and making it more difficult elsewhere, or base entry fees or zonal fees. I mean, all the things kind of various folks have talked about. What do you say is the role of Stewardship Council in kind of fostering, promoting, advocating for these ideas, and then bringing them to the decision-making bodies where those decisions are made? Because you're not going to make the policy decisions, but you can help set it up, right?
Thank you, John, or Board Member Friedrich. Apologies. Okay. Mr. John Friedrich. Well, and I might not answer that directly, but I think it's important for us, Carol Chaplin, by the way, for the record. I think it's important to understand that when we start to look at this body of work, these action items, and there were many of them, and all those action items bubbled up from all those surveys and those conversations that we had. We're still in the infant stage of figuring out which one is we own as the Stewardship Council, which ones we support because they're already being done, trash cans, for instance, or, talking about the parking situation, and which ones we get involved in and which ones we support in a different way. For instance, do we come and advocate at a public meeting for, one of these things, or do we actually take it on? And so that's our next steps, starting in December with our first meeting with our new managing director. And so the road is long. We're not very far along, but it was very clear when we started this process that the plan had to be a living plan, and it had to be, an executable plan. And so we'll start to support and advocate in some ways, as you suggested. Right.
So the road will be long and filled with non-motorized transportation.
The bike path will be long.
Great.
We're all walking.
Super. Alexis?
Thank you. Thank you for your work on this. I know that the communication, I think, has improved greatly, especially with everyone coming together. So thank you for that. And I just am wondering, to John's point, is there anything else that jurisdictionally we can do or TRPA can do that maybe is missing, or maybe y'all can think about that? But I'd certainly love to have you come to Washoe County and RSCVA to see how we can continue to spread this great work. And I know part of our job is I'm on the RSCVA board as that DMO is to talk about why we're important to the local economy. This is not the case in California, but many of the reasons that we don't have income tax is because we have tourism, and it's incredibly important to Nevada and certainly to Northern Nevada. So just please stay in touch, or if you have ideas today, I'd like to hear them. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. The counties and local jurisdictions have been great partners in the planning process. And as we move forward to implementation, obviously financing and supporting the council structure that way, but also project implementation. As you're going about the normal things you're doing, Washoe County's already got grand plans for transportation improvements, bike path improvements, really making sure that destination stewardship principles are ingrained into the things you're already doing is extremely helpful. And making sure when you're designing a new trail or a new recreation facility that you're talking with the Take Care team and getting the right signage for Take Care Tahoe in those recreation sites. And RSCVA, Reno Sparks Visitors and Convention Authority, or something like that, was a partner in the planning process. And I think that shows the power of the destination stewardship. We had them and also Visit Truckee Tahoe. So outside of our jurisdictional boundaries, people were coming together. And during the height of COVID, RSCVA had a billboard in the San Francisco Bay Area that was promoting Reno Tahoe, but it was a picture of Emerald Bay. And they actually pulled that billboard down while still paying to have the blank space up because they understood the importance of being a good partner at the table. So I think that's just another example of how folks are already engaging and then can continue engagement and towards implementation.
Okay, Jessica, and then I do know we have a couple hands up online. I'll come to our board members online in just a minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I did, thank you for the presentation. I'm very excited about the plan. I did want to echo Alexis a little bit as a Nevadan and someone who worked in state government. All I hear, like, tourism equals dollar signs. So it's, if people wanted a primer on what happened to our budget in 2020, I would love to go over that with everybody. I was working in state government. It was not a fun time. And when you have to cut, important resource programs for children and the elderly because you have no money, then you really learn to love tourism. One thing I wanted to ask about, which it sounds like we're sort of working in that direction with Take Care Tahoe and Clean Tahoe and all of the programs that we have sort of front loaded to manage the litter. But the litter does seem to be a real pressure point for folks. It makes people feel like there's a lot of disrespect coming from the tourists and things like that. I do think more trash cans and things like that will help. But I also wondered if you all have looked at other high tourism areas that have like big peaks like we do, like New Orleans, for example, where I think that they've sort of just accepted that this is part of Mardi Gras to have litter, and they just have a cleaning crew ready to go the next day and they clean it up. And yes, everyone would rather that the litter not be there at all, but to prepare for it in that way. Understanding that it's not necessarily the responsibility of the local jurisdictions, but because of the benefits that tourism brings, that it's just part of the balance. Like we'll just accept that it's going to happen and we'll head it off at the pass kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think everything's on the table right now, so it's a great idea. I mean, what's so, I think, exciting about this is now we have Nettie on board. We're going to have we have an all-day workshop on December 5th. We're going to start to develop working groups. I know Devin very much wants us to see a litter working group. I think we might want to call it waste management working group, but yeah, I think we have to look at all solutions. The other thing I'll say is we have to stop talking about it. Social science, a number of us went through a social science workshop. We hired social scientists a few years back to understand how do you change behavior. And one of the big lessons was you can't, the more you show the bad behavior, the more you are creating a cultural norm of that behavior, and it actually exacerbates the problem. So we don't want to show pictures of trash on beaches and say, can you believe people trash the beaches? Because then that tells everybody you can trash the beaches in Tahoe. What we want to show are the norms we want, which is a beautiful, pristine area, and talk about how people are making the effort to keep these places clean. So I think collectively, we've all had a lot of conversation around that. Unfortunately, the media just latches onto things. That's all they want to talk about. The LA Times wrote a story this summer where they talked about trails with litter spewed everywhere. It was like, are you on the same trails I'm on? Because this isn't my experience. So I think we have to do a better job of changing the narrative because social science shows us that's going to have the biggest impact.
The other thing I would mention, and this is where I think the destination marketing organizations can really come into play, is we used to talk to people, in Seattle or Dallas. We're still going to do that. We're still going to promote tourism, obviously, because we need it and we want it here. But now we will broaden that messaging strategy to include messages that are very specifically, this is how you behave when you come here. It also takes us to model that behavior. So when we look at the beach on July 5th, that wasn't all tourists. We did some digging on that one, and some of my friends who still have children at home, poor friends, but they still have children at home, they saw their kids. So we need to model that better as well. We're getting more sensitive to it, I think, just generally as a population. It starts to needle at you a little bit earlier. Our sensitivity is pretty high for that. But going back to the DMO, we have the Lake Tahoe Visitors Authority modeled our strategic plan that is just being published right now off of this work. So we will be adding that layer of messaging that has to do with how we behave here, how you can find out what you can do and what you can't. Can you have a plastic bottle? Can you not? And we'll also broaden our messaging to be in market. So it won't be just talking to people before they get here. We'll be able to talk to people when they get here. And I think that's going to help with that whole process, especially with the litter. We don't call it trash anymore, right? We're litter, now we're waste management, but hopefully, and the Take Care program, for instance, maybe we already put money into that program, but maybe we'll do more. We'll find a better way to get those touch points with those visitors, try to correct it. I see that as still messaging is still a way that we can help support this plan.
Yeah, and I hate to continue the trash talk.
Yeah, that's okay.
But
We're good at it.
I spent 26 years working at Tahoe City Public Utility District under contract with Placer County. Now I sit in another seat overseeing those contracts. A lot of the issue, at least on North Shore and West Shore, was our routine of picking up trash at a certain time every afternoon, long before people were doing takeout food. COVID brought us takeout food, much more trash, people at beaches, at picnic tables with takeout food. The last pickup was 3:00 in the afternoon. So what I witnessed, and I visited our beaches because I'm very proud of the work I did for all those years on those beaches. Visitors had bagged up their trash. They left it by the trash can. They assumed, and I would have assumed, a local municipality was coming back to take it. So why did we contract with Clean Tahoe? It wasn't that they're out picking up every individual piece of trash. They're focused on emptying the trash in the cans that we've now had to put more out there. We've asked for more frequent cleanups. So from Placer County side, I can speak to, we needed more infrastructure to allow the visitors. And so visitors took a bad rap. I didn't see anybody just like walking on a trail throwing out their trash. And then at night, animals would come. There would be this nice picnic basket for them. And they would, whether it was geese, raccoons, or bears, it would be all over the beach the next day, distributed by our wildlife. Trying to get the remnants for their diet. So I think we have to be careful. I continue to feel this anger about tourism that points fingers instead of what we did, and we always did. July 3rd and 4th, we did cleanups till midnight at night. That was just part of our culture, but we only paid that overtime on those peak days. So what do we need? And again, to your point of, it's really our infrastructure and our service because things happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've heard me say this before, Cindy, but if the July 5th beach day, right? That took all the headlines. And it was locals, it wasn't tourists that created that. But if you would take that one location, Zephyr Shoals, out, the headline would have been Tahoe's beaches, the cleanest we've ever seen on July 5th. And so we lost the media narrative on that one, unfortunately. And then that's what really gets, pokes the bear.
People angry.
Yeah.
Angry. Absolutely. And then one other point, and then I know we have comments online from our board members. The group that I saw that you didn't survey that is so powerful and so large on North Shore is our vacation homeowners. Some 70% of those are not rented. They're owner used and have a lot of friends and family use them. And so how can we reach that group? It's been, as long as I was at the PUD, hard group to reach. We would try to do it through utility bills. Many of them don't even necessarily pay their own utility bills. We would try to get the word out through HOAs and newsletters, but I just urge you to really look at that group because they use their homes. There's some of those people that we don't recognize every day, but they're here using their home. And especially on North Shore, I can speak to those demographics.
Yeah.
It's a huge number of the homes are used that way and a growing number.
I think you bring up a great point, which is that too often we easily lump things into you're either a resident or you're a visitor. And I think what we learned in this study, which we already knew, is there's a lot of different sections within that. There's second homeowners who spend a lot of time here. There's second homeowners who don't spend a lot of time here. There's vacation rentals. One thing that was uncovered, I think that's probably the hardest solution or the hardest challenge to solve are our day visitors. The study, they called it untethered visitors, but we know there's 4 to 5 million people who come up, they recreate and they go home. And we're not sure how much they're actually contributing to the economy, but we have a pretty good sense they're contributing to the impacts to the environment. So I think we need to be more strategic as we move forward and thinking about how we're reaching each. Placer County, actually NTCA just funded a whole new initiative with Take Care Tahoe to reach STRs with a whole campaign of environmental messaging, stewardship messaging. So before they arrive, once they're in the homes, how they can do. So, for example, don't stop at Costco and buy cases of plastic water bottles before you come to Tahoe. It's totally unnecessary, and bear messaging and dog and things.
And we need to do that for the second homeowners.
Yep.
too,
So I
or
think,
vacation.
I think we
homeowners.
can take what we do with
Yeah.
the SDRs and just expand it.
Expand it. That's great. Ashley, you had your hand up first, I think, and then I'll go to Cisco.
Thanks so much. I wanted to connect our last presentation with this one and find out from your polling if you had learned anything about whether visitors receive that information about aquatic species and potentially change their behavior as a result, or essentially how much they're connecting those aquatic invasive species signage with their recreation. So that's my first question. And the second is, you had up a slide that showed the dog waste issue. And I find that one of the most surprising things in Tahoe. It's like one of the few places I go where dog waste is really just left on the beaches in the snow. And I'm just wondering, like, how you're getting the word out that that waste will go into the lake when the snow melts, and what that messaging campaign is, and what progress you feel like you're making on it. So just those two questions. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Devin Middlebrook, for the record, not sure you can see me from the Zoom world. On the first question, the AIS connection, the survey we did for the Destination Stewardship Plan didn't get into that level of detail, but other information we have through our Aquatic Invasive Species Program, the Tahoe Keeper Program, surveys that we do of boaters at our inspection stations do show that the messaging is working. Our annual opinion polling that we do show that that messaging is working, and more people are aware of the program. More and more people are clean draining and drying their craft. So that stuff does work. And as we move forward with the AIS program and things like New Zealand mud snail, we're really going to take the successes we've had in the past and continue them, and then expand those successes to other programs and other focus areas of the EIP. And then I'll let Amy answer the dog waste question.
Sure. I mean, we've been working for 10 years to convince people that if it's your dog, it's your duty. Or be number one at picking up number two. I think what we learned through this process is Take Care has been around now for 10 years, believe it or not, or almost 10 years. And there's a lot of good things about it. It just isn't big enough. It isn't powerful enough. And so I think there's one of the pillars is building a culture of caretaking. And one of the first things we're going to do is look at the Take Care campaign and understand, what does it do well? What does it need to do either better or differently for it to be adopted under the council? And then I think we have this kind of great firepower that we always wanted behind it, ready to kind of super promote it. And, one of the things we created Take Care back in the day was that we were all drowning each other out with stewardship messages. And the idea was, could we just have one campaign for the whole region? And then now we look back, and we have like 100 different stewardship stewardship messages within Take Care, and we're kind of drowning each other out in Take Care. So some of the thinking right now is to get to more what we call tent pole messaging. So just focus on maybe 3 or 4 key initiatives. And we think through just focusing on those, that together they elevate all sort of level of stewardship. Litter and pet waste is definitely one of those tent poles. But it also comes down to, back to Cindy's point about infrastructure. Do we know where the dog waste is? And do we have dog waste stations there? Are we giving people the bags to pick up? One thing we learned in social science is most bags are green or brown. And then what happens is people pick them up. Their dog starts walking on the trail, they poop, they leave the bag because they know they're coming back. And then it kind of blends in with the environment. And then the bags are left on the trail. And what we learned in this social science workshop is that we actually need like bright orange bags so that you can't miss them, because we know that that's one of the issues. So how do we have bags in the right places? How do we have garbage cans for them? How do we have the messaging so we can capture the dogs before they do their duty?
Thank you.
Are you done? Okay, Cisco?
Yeah, a question on when you talk about tourism dollars, how many of those actually go back to the local communities versus the state or the county?
That is a great question. I think a lot of the secondary spending is difficult to track. In the study, it showed that the direct spending was about $4.5 billion. And the kind of secondary with the multiplier of the total economic output was more close to 10 billion. So you're looking at about a 2 times multiplier. where all of those dollars trickle down in terms of, tax dollars in in Washoe County that are for hotels, what percentage of that stays in Tahoe, what percentage of that goes back to the main county budget, and how it trickles out is something we do need better data on and better understanding of. I think in general, we're also talking about doing more detailed economic studies to see how long dollars stay in the region. If a visitor comes in and spends $1 at a local coffee shop, how often or respent is that dollar in the local economy? And having better data around that will help us better support the economic actions in the plan. So it's something we do need better data on, is on our radar. So I appreciate you bringing up that point.
How do you get that data? Or how do you increase the transparency of that data?
Yeah, there's some really innovative firms out there that are doing economic analysis on ecosystem service benefits. So really putting a dollar amount on the value of clean air, clean water, tracking visitor spending, multipliers, using AI and machine learning to project that out in the future, given different climate scenarios and different weather patterns, if it's a drought year, if it's a big snow year. So there's some economic firms out there that are doing some really interesting work in this space. So working with one of those firms and bringing some expertise in is something we could do in the future.
In the future, are you talking 10 years? Or are you talking like 6
Definitely
months,
not
a
10
year?
years. I actually had a call yesterday with one of those firms to get some more information on their products. So we're actively having those discussions now. So definitely not 10 years.
Okay, so in a year, we could expect some of this information, or?
Potentially, it depends on the ability to fund that work.
And what is the cost of funding that work?
So it depends on the scope and how you want to go, how big you want to go, but that could be, on the low end from $50,000 up to the high end of $200,000, depending on the overall scope of that work.
Is that something TRPA would pay for, or who pays for that type of study?
Those conversations are ongoing. It would most likely it would be as Tahoe does many things and fund it collaboratively. So all of the partners in the region contributing to funding like that. But I could definitely see TRPA being one of those contributors.
And I
Okay,
think
and the reason I'm asking, it goes back to the discussion about state route, especially 28 on the Nevada side, is what are the funding sources that are available to fund infrastructure from a safety perspective? And so I'm just trying to get an understanding as I have these conversations, what dollars are flowing back into the local communities to address some of these high priority needs.
And I think Alexis wanted to respond to that too, Siska.
Yes,
Okay,
Secretary
thank you.
Aguilar, I think we need to talk about that for Washoe, because the way that our taxes are structured through NRS is they go directly to our CDA. Our CDA then gives a portion to the Visitors Authority in Incline Village. The Visitors Authority has their own mission and they've been doing a lot. I just got an email that they're going to be helping us with snow clearing, but it's not enough money. And so I think we need to talk about that, because in California, there's a bit more of an ability to use TOT for direct services for community. So that's not really happening in Nevada.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you. Alex, did you have a comment or question? Okay.
Nope, I'm good. Thank you.
Anyone else here in the room? Great. Well, on behalf of, oh, yes, Julie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just really want to thank our esteemed panel, our terrific colleagues for this presentation. And I think just judging from the interest of the board, we're so fortunate to have built this new table, and wanted just to kind of tie a bow on a couple of the key points. And I'll start with the economics piece. One of the things that we have all collectively realized in Tahoe over the last several years, we have this incredible body of work in the physical sciences around the lake, but only in more recent years have we been delving into the social science, the socioeconomic drivers. The Science Council is getting involved in that. So that's a positive shift. And it's really within the last 4+ years that we even did an economic study of the environmental improvement program, so that we can quantify. We know that 1,700 jobs are a result of the EIP program and some of the other multipliers. So we're getting better at that, but to really address the challenges I think we've highlighted, we have to be more sophisticated in that work. So that's on the horizon. I wanted to also mention Tahoe in Depth as a really key vehicle to reach those part-time homeowners. We know from our readership that particularly in those who subscribe to Tahoe in Depth, it's largely part-time homeowners. So that will continue to be a really key vehicle to get the messages out. We know it's effective. We need to do more. We only publish 2 issues a year. We'd like to do a third, so every 4 months. You know, consistency of message is really key in breaking through the clutter that's out there. So that's something that we're working on. And then in terms of the changing demographics, Ashley Conrad Seda brought up last month's presentation, and there is so much of a connection of what we've seen in the transformation of our economy from a gaming dominated economy where people drove and parked in parking lots and were in one centralized area that had infrastructure to support that. As that has shifted over the last 20 years, we really have not invested in that infrastructure to handle the roadway parking, the corridor impacts, the increase in the beach access on 28 and 89 in Nevada and California. And it's no surprise that we're seeing these pressure points. But the good news is we do have the ability to solve that. And we have the data, I think, that is going to help us do a better job in that. And we've also seen changing residents in recent times, and more people are moving here that don't have that historical knowledge of the connection to tourism, you know, to Member Lane's point. And so we do often have to do a better job of communicating those benefits from an economic standpoint, from a quality of life standpoint, and we can work on that. And then the final wrap-up point that we've touched on is that 80-20 rule. If you take the visitors at their word, you know, that roughly 80% feel like they're doing a good job of taking care of Tahoe when they visit, there is a 20% problem of those who aren't, but that 20% problem gets all the exposure. And so let's also work together with our incredible powerhouses at the table, the DMOs, the marketing organizations, and now the new members of the Stewardship Council with Vail and Palisades. These are the institutional touch points of our visitors, and we can harness that power of education and marketing in a way that public agencies will never have the budgets to do. And so by unifying and getting synced up with our messages and the power of that access, that's unprecedented. And that's what building a new table really looks like. So I think it's exciting. It's groundbreaking. We are leading a national and international discussion around the work that we're doing in Tahoe. Certainly a huge challenge ahead of us. It's not getting any easier. We know from the trends in outdoor recreation, people have discovered the great outdoors and they're going to keep coming. So just really appreciate the partnership and the work that's been so diligent over these last few years. And we were even ahead of this in even starting this conversation well before COVID. So we've got a lot of solid ground to build on. And I really appreciate the board's engagement and the discussion in this.
Thank you, Julie. Well, on behalf of the whole board, thank you, Carol, for being here, Amy, for being here, Devin, your great work on this. And I think on behalf of the local jurisdictions anyway, we want to be at the table and do more funding on data research. I can say that for myself and for Placer County for sure, because the more data we have on these issues, we need to be a part of that, right? Because we feel that pressure. My full board feels that pressure every time we're in Tahoe about this angst that we're feeling in our communities. And we get the letters, thousands of letters on Tahoe issues as a board of supervisors. So, you know, understanding that and playing a vital role, you know, let me know when you need more funding, because sometimes the people at the table working with you on a daily basis don't know how passionate I think our board is about getting that data. And I think others are too. So be part of that solution. Thank you so much. Okay, this was an information item only. A reminder to the public, if you'd like to talk about any of those items, we will entertain those comments at our final public comment period. We're now on to item 7, reports. And we'll start with Julie on this one.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Julie Reagan, TRPA Executive Director. I just have a few slides. I know that the General Counsel and I are standing in between you and lunch. So we will move through this so that we can then convene after lunch with the Regional Planning Committee, and we have a big agenda there. So, but there are some important items that I wanted to cover. So the first slide I will take really touches the earlier discussion on aquatic invasive species and destination stewardship. So it's actually a nice segue into some work that's been ongoing for some time, but just last Tuesday, as I mentioned in my previous report and an email, I was invited by Senator Jackie Rosen to represent TRPA and to represent our greater partnership at her subcommittee on travel and tourism with the theme on destination stewardship. So the Congress is even talking about sustainable recreation and tourism. And so the picture, the lower right picture is with Senator Rosen and two of my colleagues. To my right, in the picture on the lower right, is the Vice President of Sustainability for the Hilton Hotels, which, one of the biggest hotel chains in the world. And on the left is a representative from Western North Carolina. The ranking member, Senator Budd, on that subcommittee is from North Carolina. And she did a beautiful job of talking about some of the work that they're doing, like in the more rural parts of North Carolina, bringing local businesses together around the very topic of sustainable tourism and looking at the big picture of how tourism gives back to their rural communities and the vital nature of tourism as well. So it was a great honor to be able to do that. And then to raise visibility around some of our challenges. And I think those of you who have testified before, that a lot of people listen to those hearings, and we've already been getting inquiries of, clean shuttles. I'll have to tell Member Friedrich about this, that could help support our transit needs here in the basin. So that was an exciting opportunity to elevate the work we're doing in Tahoe, but also to plug the Restoration Act extension and some of the other needs that we have. Going to the top left, Congressman Amodei has been a real champion for us on the House side of getting our Lake Tahoe Restoration Act extended. And right now we need to get a committee hearing in the House, and we have some hiccups that we're working through. But we took the opportunity to give him the latest on what we're doing in Tahoe and really leverage the issue of the New Zealand mud snails as an urgent point to get that act reauthorized. Because if we lost funding for the Restoration Act on the invasive species program, that would have, really catastrophic results. So took an opportunity to talk to him. And then in the lower left, a personal highlight for me was amazing. That is U.S. Senator Tom Carper from Delaware. He is the longest serving elected official in the state's history. I knew him when he was the state treasurer before he went to Congress, became the governor, and has been the senator for 20 plus years. He's the chair of the Environment and Public Works Committee, and that is the committee that our bill needs to hitch a ride on to go through the Water Resources Development Act. And we're having some issues on that. So it was a great opportunity to meet with him and his staff. His staff is also very key on infrastructure funding in general that flows through that committee. So I tried to leverage, the opportunity to be back there. It was an unplanned trip, but it was a trip worth making. And I really wanted you to know of how all these dots intersect in terms of the work that we do and the partnerships that we have, to keep elevating the Tahoe message. And so a couple other legislative announcements I wanted to make, if you can go back one more. The upper right is the interim committee, Nevada legislative icon there. And we all know the legislature in Nevada meets every other year, and we're heading into an interim session. And so we have the Nevada Oversight Committee. It's the oversight for Tahoe Regional Planning Agency and the Marlette Lake Water System. And we have some new members. And so I wanted to just let you all know that there has been a 6-member committee appointed, and we only have really one returning member. Senator Robin Titus, when she served in the Assembly, served on our Oversight Committee for many years. She is back. Melanie Scheibel, who's a senator from Southern Nevada, actually is returning, but she was newer in more recent years. So she will be returning onto the committee. Senator Skip Daly from Washoe County, Assemblywoman Shannon Bilbray Axelrod from Clark County, Assemblyman Rich DeLong, who is important because his district touches the lake, will be serving on the interim committee, as well as Assembly Member Angie Taylor of Washoe County. So we have a 6-member committee, and many of you have joined us for tours. Senator Settlemyre served on that committee as a senator and can vouch for the quality tours that we like to provide. So we'll be doing that again, starting, if not by the end of this calendar year, in the early next year. And that committee will be key. Member Hill and Member Dis have been before that committee many times, again, urging the cooperation of transportation funding, of all of those partnerships that we can leverage: federal dollars, California dollars, local and private dollars. So that was a new development I wanted to share. And then on the right, there's a new logo for something called the California Tahoe Alliance. And you have heard me mention this group before. Member Loomer has been actually active with that group, as well as Member Lane, on some tours and some advocacy in the Capitol in California. After one of the more recent bonds passed in California, the EIP partnership came together to unify voices in Sacramento to up our presence in front of legislators in California. So this group's been meeting for many years, and TRPA was instrumental in helping it get set up. And right now, Darcy Collins from the League to Save Lake Tahoe coordinates that group. It's roughly a dozen partners, the local jurisdictions on the California side, public utility districts, the Tahoe Fund, the Tahoe Resource Conservation District, and other partners, the Lake Tahoe Community College, for example, come together to have a unified legislative advocacy platform. And our issues are in the forefront. We also have the California Tahoe Conservancy as an advisory member to that group. So should a climate bond be placed on the ballot next year, we are making sure that Tahoe is top of mind, is included in those, in addition to the formula funding for transportation that would match federal statute and bring potentially millions of dollars into Tahoe in the transportation space to help fulfill that 777 funding share. So there's just a really large amount of work that's going on behind the scenes, and we'll be getting into that at the committee level in both the EIP committee and the transportation committee next year. But I just wanted you to know of some pretty important elements that are happening right now. And from our shop, Kim Carringer and Devin Middlebrook and many other staff members work with all of our partners to make sure that we help coordinate and do a little cat herding, because the cat herding is pretty important in this space. So speaking of cats, if we could go to the next slide. We had the pet parade. No cats this year, although we have had cats at the pet parade before, I may say. It was all dogs. I don't know if you can see that people adorned their beautiful animals with beautiful Halloween costumes. We do this every year on Halloween. It is super fun. If any of you are having a rough time and need a break from trick-or-treating, come to TRPA. We trick-or-treat with our staff members' children around the office, and then we walk around the parking lot. We were in the back parking lot this year. We actually walked through Design Workshop, our neighbor in the back, and they loved it. We had no dog barking or fight incidents or messes. So we were good at doing our dog duty, but it is a huge highlight for our staff to get together, and we always have like warm cider and refreshments. And I just wanted to say the pet parade is alive and well. And with that, a couple of new staffers are in the room, and I just wanted to introduce them. Last month, I did already introduce Kayla Horowitz, who is at our front desk. She's our new public service specialist, and she's doing a good job. Wanted to just a minor announcement yesterday. Some of you probably already heard, perhaps Member Lane here on the South Shore. We've been getting visited by someone from the Bay Area who's a First Amendment advocate and is going around to public institutions filming the reaction of that person. And he came here yesterday, and it was a little unnerving because he's masked with, a hoodie and dark glasses, and went to the Tahoe Transportation District office, then came to our front desk. And I really want to thank Kayla. She was professional and calm and courteous and friendly, and she was being filmed the whole time. The individual filmed a lot of different people in their offices from the windows, and we showed, I think, our finest hour of being professional and helpful. And that's all on YouTube. So you can watch that if you want to. He filmed at the local Unified School District and some other public institutions, but I'm really proud of our team for just being professional. And certainly, we knew if law enforcement needed to be called, and that actually happened, but there were no incidents. So I just wanted you to know that, but just to reemphasize, how proud I am of our team for handling themselves the way that they did. So a couple of other new staffers, I just wanted to actually invite them up. Michelle Brown is in the audience. And then we also have Kaylee. Kaylee, if you want to just come up to the podium. And Kaylee Barolata, did I get that right? Arboleta, very close. I just wanted to invite them to introduce themselves to you. Michelle is our newest planning associate here at Long Range. She brings a wealth of knowledge to us, so we are delighted to have her just help us on our housing policy work and joining our regional planning team. She has a really interesting background. She actually was a botanist for the U.S. Forest Service, so any plant questions, ask Michelle, but she will be working on all the great housing work and really helping us up our game on our regional planning team. So Michelle, did you just want to introduce yourself?
Madam Chair, board members, nice to meet you all today, and I'm glad to be here. As Julie mentioned, thank you for that lovely introduction. I started my work here in the Lake Tahoe Basin with LTBMU as a botanist, and from there, across the country to Colorado, North Carolina, and now I'm back here home in Lake Tahoe, and I'm very happy to be here with TRPA, and I look forward to working with all you very soon.
Great. And then Kaylee Arboleda is with AmeriCorps, but she will be with us for a year, and she is working on her master's degree at University of Florida. Go Gators, from Gainesville, the birthplace of Tom Petty, my late dear Tom Petty. But Kayla, I do really want to welcome you, and I know that you will be doing a lot of the outreach, as you've heard briefings on in the phase 3 housing work. We're talking phase 2 in just a bit. Phase 3 is going to be a game changer for Tahoe and for TRPA in really reaching underserved communities. And that is a big piece of work that Kaylee is going to do. So Kaylee, if you just want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. You touched on a lot of the things I'm doing. I am a master's student, first year undergrad or graduate student. Just graduated from a sustainability program at the University of Florida. I just recently moved up 4 days ago from the Gainesville area. And yeah, I'm really excited to work on the affordable housing initiatives and kind of get a glimpse of what the planning field is like.
Great. Thank you. Welcome.
Hopefully she likes snow from Florida.
From Florida. Great. And then I will just touch on what's coming before you in the next meeting or so, and then we will get on to our next report. But as we mentioned, perfect segue, we have been doing a lot of outreach to let the community know that the Regional Planning Committee will be talking about housing amendments today, and we'll be bringing you a recommendation at the December board meeting. But the other big news story for December is we're having a holiday lunch. So we used to do this as a tradition, and the last couple of years we've moved it to an after board meeting get together. But this year, since it is a big agenda with the regional plan amendments and code amendments for housing, we thought we'd just take a nice break, have a nice lunch. So make sure that you bring your appetite for that. Steve has a fantastic Thanksgiving style lunch for us today too. So that's another highlight. And then going forward, if we go to the next slide, we can just preview a couple of topics. I should say you all are invited to the TRPA holiday party as well. Those of you that live closer by might be interested, because for the first time we're having it at Valhalla on the U.S. Forest Service site near Pope Beach. It's the Tallac Historic Site, and it's an incredible venue. It's usually booked, so we got really lucky that we're able to have it there. So that will be December 8th. You'll, if you haven't received an invitation, just let us know. We'll make sure you get that. And then also in December, we'll be chartering our first meeting of the new Transportation Committee, the newly constituted Transportation Committee. We have a few items there. We have the Regional Planning Committee, which will be hearing Placer County area plan amendments after the conclusion of the board meeting. Operations Committee, and the Nevada Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, which is basically the Nevada delegation of the board. We may be also having a meeting either in the morning or at lunch or right after lunch of that group as well, still to be determined. Wanted to flag it. And then coming next year, we have the Meeks Bay restoration, which you've heard a few times, went on a field tour. It's finally coming to you for action in the first quarter. We'll be talking about VMT, not only at the Regional Planning Committee level in December, but also in the January board meeting. And then we'll be having a discussion and some action on thresholds related to stream environment zones and invasive species. So we have some pretty exciting topics coming up in the new year that I just wanted to put on your radar. And that should be my last slide. So we will, I will conclude there, and thank you for the report.
Great, thank you. Mr. Marshall.
Well, I really only have one thing to say, and that's thank you for putting the snack table right here. Really appreciate it. Sent out an email with a couple of updates on our cases so that you can see that. Our search for a high-level associate did not end well, unfortunately. We had someone it's a difficult search to find someone who wants to come in as a high-level associate, but who you would like to, to build into a potential candidate for this slot, because that usually means they're stepping back, plus there's some uncertainty associated with the final hiring decision, which is ultimately your decision as to my position. So we're going to recalibrate and look to see what we can do and maybe think about some other ways to service our legal needs. So we'll keep you informed on that. That's it. Thank you.
Sorry to hear that, but glad to have you here. It's kind of handcuffs, I think. Okay, governing board member reports, item 8 on our agenda. Are there any governing board member reports? Looking around the room, those of you online, anybody have a report to share? I'm not seeing any. Then we'll go on to committee reports. Local government and housing, I don't think we've met, correct? Legal committee. Operations and governance. EITPO. And forest health, wildfire, and RPIC will meet in a little bit. Okay, then now we're to the general public interest comment period. Any member of the public wishing to address the governing board on any item listed or not listed on the agenda, including items on the consent calendar, may do so at this time. Individuals or groups who have already commented on items listed on the agenda are not permitted to comment on that same topic. The governing board is prohibited by law from taking immediate action on or discussing issues raised by the public during this comment period. We'll hear comments on any single topic not on the agenda for up to, but not to exceed 30 minutes, and we will hear as many unique comments as possible. Written comments received by 4 p.m. yesterday were forwarded to the board before the meeting start time. Late comments may be distributed and posted after the meeting. All unheard comments can be submitted via email to publiccomment@trpa.gov. Please include the meeting information and agenda item in the subject line of your email. So I'll open it up now. If there's any member of the public here in the room that would like to address the board. I'm not seeing any. And then I'll look online. Is there anybody online? Please raise your hand on Zoom and we will call on you and unmute you.
Madam Chair, there was a hand up, but it just went down. I'll just give that member of the public a moment. If they do want to comment, please raise your hand and keep it raised.
Yes, if you're online, raise your hand.
The first hand raised is Elise Fett. Elise, if you unmute, you can address the board.
Hi, this is actually Julie on behalf of Elise Fett. I wanted to comment. We kind of had 2 comments. I know we don't have a lot of time. So the first is with respect to the aquatic invasive species. We are really happy with the work done so far, but we also really want to talk about just the nutrients portion of weeds specifically and how to combat them. And I think actually it kind of goes with the stewardship program. Those signs that slow down Tahoe and the trash signs have been so helpful. And we think that it would be so great if we could get a sign out there that says to love the lake and stop using fertilizers. Fertilizers, even with all of the VMPs and all the great things that we've done, still do make it into the lake and do add nutrients and contribute to weed and algal growth. And then also with the fight against the weeds, what wasn't talked about was some of the other things that are happening, like laminar flow aeration and used to reduce biomass and these sorts of things. And we really think we want to keep those non-chemical solutions in the forefront and make sure that people are aware of what's going on with those and how they're working. and just the options. We're really want to address these and keep our lake as healthy as possible with as little chemical activity as possible. Wow, I spoke really fast, so I think that's all right now. But those are our main comments. We want to keep up the good work, but we also think we can do more, and especially with the nutrients and trying to keep the fertilizers out of the lake. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
The next hand raised, the name on Zoom is Keep Tahoe Blue. If you unmute, you can address the board.
Hey, good morning. This is Gavin Feiger on behalf of the League to Save Lake Tahoe. I just wanted to give quick comments on the AIS info item. And really just thanks to Chair Gustafson for connecting us with Liberty. They did come out and did some work, and my coworker Laura was telling me today that they're coming out again this week to ensure that the new compressor is fully operational. So thank you, Cindy, for helping us make that happen. We did fund the entire bubble curtain at the Keys, and we're looking to take over ownership of it. So we'll keep working with TRPA and the Property Owners Association and the Marina and Liberty to make sure that the bubble curtain is up and running for the foreseeable future. And we're also, on the funding piece, we'll continue to help everybody raise money. Before the mud snail discovery, we were only at about, I think it was around 50% of the AIS program was funded. So we definitely need to get more money in there. And, we're working with TRPA and everybody to try to make that happen. So thanks for all the work on it.
Thank you, Gavin.
And Madam Chair, there are no other hands raised to comment on this item.
Okay, so we'll close the public comment period. Is there a motion to adjourn today?
So moved.
They were rushing for their mics. There was competition there for lunch. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. So we're adjourning our governing board meeting now at 11:35. The RPIC